This video is a request by Technic. Enjoy. Hello everyone, in this video we're going to be building the IP address tracker from Frontend Mentor. So you can head over into frontendmentor.io/challenges. You can search for this card and you can click it, and then we can begin. And before I begin, I should mention that we're going to be using the Geolocation API and Leaflet.js to generate our maps, and hopefully we're going to get it looking similar to this design. I also do want to mention another thing, and it's that I already completed this challenge and I had already recorded it and was in the middle of editing it when I realized that my video was corrupted and I didn't have about 30 minutes of the video in between. So this is me redoing it, and therefore what I'm going to do is I'm not going to create a repository for what we're going to build. However, if you go into my profile and into this repository, I'm going to leave this link in the description. Then you're going to have access to the code. It is most likely not going to be similar to what we are going to write out right now. However, I will try to maintain the functionality so that even if you're going to be checking this repository against the video, then you're going to be able to follow along even if we have different variables that we're going to create. So once again, the reason why I'm doing that is because my footage got corrupted for this actual video that I recorded, and so I have to redo it. As we begin, then please subscribe to the channel if you're not already, and ring the notification bell so that you're always going to be notified of when I upload a new video. We're going to be using React Leaflet alongside Leaflet.js to generate our components, because React Leaflet contains components similar to Leaflet.js because it's actually based off Leaflet.js, where we'll be able to get the latitude and the longitude, and then we're going to display it on the map, and then we're going to readjust the map so that it displays the actual location on our map in our application. So before we begin, what you have to do is you have to go into this link right here. This link, you can just click on this. It will redirect you into the Geolocation API, and if you don't have an account, you're going to have to create an account. It is completely free, so you don't have to add your credit card details. And then once you log in, you can go into API docs right here. And this is an example of the GET request that we're going to be sending. So if I go into this link, it should show me some data. So we have the IP address right here. We have the location of the IP address. We have the region, the time zone, and here we have the domains associated with this IP address. And then we also have the company that it is registered to here. So this is just an example of the GET request that we're going to be running. The actual GET request that we want to run is the country and the city. And the reason for this is you can just click on this tab right here. You'll find that the difference here is that we are getting the country and the city as well. Now this is important because let me go ahead and just run this GET request. Okay, just copy this. We are going to be getting back the IP address, the location, and you can see we have more data here. And so we have the region, the city, we have the latitude, and we have the longitude. And this is very important to us because if you look in the documentation for Leaflet.js, you'll see that the position is going to be respective of the latitude first and then the longitude. That is why we are going to be running this GET request. Which one is it? This one, this second one. So let's go ahead and begin. And what I've done is I've created a new React application, and I've called it IP address tracker YT. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code into this folder. So I'm going to say code IP address tracker YT, which is going to open up an instance of Visual Studio Code into this folder. And now I can close this. And then what I'm going to do is back in Frontend Mentor, you can go ahead and download these files if you have not downloaded them. But since I already have them, then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into my downloads folder, and I'm going to get the zip file that is called IP address tracker master. And then once I extract it, then it's going to extract into this folder called IP address tracker master. And then if you have Visual Studio Code, then you can just say right click and then open with code, which is going to open up another instance of Visual Studio Code. And for this one, I'm going to place this to the right. So we're going to have our two windows here. And then what I'm going to do is I just want to do a bit of copying and pasting. So select the style guide, the readmes, the index HTML, the images, and the design, and then just drag them and drop them into your workspace here, and then say copy folders. Now this is important, say copy folders. So replace this and replace this, and then inside this git ignore, I just want to select everything inside here, so copy, and then inside my React application, I just want to go to the bottom of this and paste it in. And then now we can close this instance of Visual Studio Code and we can maximize our React application. And then now what we need to do is we need to change this to line 35, and then change this to line 36, and then we need to change this into line 29, and then we can save this. Now as we begin, let me also open up the design files inside here so we can have a reference. So the desktop design. And so now what I want to do is I want to install Tailwind CSS, which is going to help us in our styling. And then I also want to install React Leaflet and Leaflet.js, which is going to help us to generate our maps. So let's go into Tailwind CSS documentation right here inside the framework guides, and we're going to look for React right here. It was moved to the bottom and it throws me off a bit. So just select this, copy this, and then using Ctrl and J, you can open up your integrated terminal, and then you can install Tailwind CSS. And then as this installs, you can copy this second line and then just wait for this to finish. And then once it finishes installing, then you can paste in your second line, which is going to generate a Tailwind config file and a post CSS config file. If it runs today, maybe. It's taking too long. Okay, there we go. So we have our Tailwind config file and our post CSS config file. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we're just going to copy this line here, copy this, and then inside our Tailwind config file, I'm just going to paste it in between these two square brackets like so, and then save it. And then we are going to go ahead and copy these 3 lines and paste it inside our index.css. So inside our source folder and inside the index.css. On top of this, I just want to copy these 3 lines. And then I'm going to remove this, and then we are going to change the font family for this one, but it can just remain for now. And then now we can start our server. Okay, now speaking of font families, let's just go ahead into our style guide markdown file, and then we can get that we're going to be using the Rubik font. We need the 400, 500, and 700 font weights. So just Control and click, which is going to open up this link. And then we're going to search for the 400, the 500, and the 700 font weights. So regular 400, medium 500, and the bold 700. And just using the import tab, just copy this, and then we're going to paste it inside our index.css on top of this. Paste it in, and then we're going to change our font family to use Rubik by default with a fallback of sans serif in case this fails to load in. And then we can save this. And then before we begin, what I want to do is I also want to set up my API key. So what I'm going to do is let's go into our Geolocation API, into our account. And by the way, once you create your account, then you're going to get your API key. So your API key starts from this equal sign to this ampersand right here. So this is going to be my API key. So I'm going to copy this, and then back inside my React application, inside the root, I'm going to create a .env file. So just go ahead and create a new file here called .env. And then inside here, we're going to be hiding our API key. So I'm going to call my API key react underscore app underscore API underscore key and set it equal to my API key that I have just copied. And then I'm going to save this. And then now what I want to do is I don't want this file to be committed to my GitHub repository, because I don't want my API key to be publicly accessible from my repository. So what I'm going to do is inside my git ignore, I'm going to go right on top of this, and I'm going to ignore my .env file as well. Make this lowercase. So ignore my .env file. And then when I save this, you'll notice that this is going to be grayed out. So save it, and it is now grayed out. So this means that when I commit this to GitHub, which I'm not going to do, by the way, because of reasons I've explained in the beginning. So when you commit this to GitHub, then the .env file is not going to be committed, and therefore your API key is going to be safe. Now you might be wondering how we are going to deploy this. I'm going to show you how you're going to do that. So you can close this down, and then now I've just realized that we need to change this to line 30, and then we need to change this to line 36, and then this to line 37. There we go. And then now we can go ahead and open up our terminal using Control and J, and then we can say npm run start, which is going to run our development server on localhost 3000. So as this opens up, what I want to do is I want to do a bit of cleaning. So I'm going to delete the app.css, the app.test.js, the logo, report with vitals, and the setup tests. So just delete these. And then inside my index.js, this is not deleted, delete. So inside my index.js, I want to remove this because we have deleted this file, remove its import as well, and close this. And then inside my app.js, we're going to remove these two files because once again, we have deleted them, and then remove the header. And then we're going to be returning a fragment just with an h1 for now that says hello world. And then what we're going to do is this. Inside the public folder, I'm going to open this up, and then I'm going to open up my images folder as well, and then just drag and drop the favicon inside here. And then we can delete the ico favicon, so delete this one. And then inside the index.html, we're going to go ahead and change the theme color here to white, so FFF, and then change the favicon here into favicon-32 times 32, and then it has an extension of PNG. And then we are going to go and save this. We're going to do the same for the logo here on the bottom. So here, copy this and paste it here so that the Apple devices also use the favicon. And then we are going to go ahead and change this title. So change this title into Frontend Mentor, and then it is called IP address tracker. So we're going to save this, and then now let's go ahead and do this. We can delete these two logos now because we have no use for them. And then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this entire images folder and then drop it inside my source folder so that we now have access to these images inside our source folder. And then we can close all of this down and then just shut this down, and our server should start now here. Let's close this link, we don't need it. And then we don't need this one. Actually, probably we do. So let me just copy this link. So copy this link, and then inside the app.js here, just on top of this, just place it inside a comment because this link is going to be useful to us in a moment because this is where we're going to be getting our data. And so we can save this, and then let's see what we need to do next. So we can close this page, and then I'm going to leave my repository open because of a reason that I'm going to explain. And then we can go ahead and close this page. We can close this page. Let me just check. We can close this page because we don't really need to have a reference for this because it is all here as well. So let me close this. And then we need React Leaflet open because we're going to be copying this part. And then we can close this one as well. And then I can close this as well because I'm not going to be submitting this for the second time. But for you, I think you can have it open for when you submit it. So let me close this. And then now our application is still loading. And so you can see that now that it has loaded in, we see hello world, but something is still wrong as the title has not changed. So let me reload it again. And there we go. So now we have our title. So I'm going to place this to the right. And then I'm going to place my code editor to the left, so that we just build out the UI first. So I want to build out the UI, and then we are going to work on getting our maps later. So let's just go ahead and do this. We're going to return a section. So let me just see how this is structured. Let's go ahead and return a section here. And then inside this section, we're going to have the top part, so an article. And then inside this article, we have a background image. So we have the title, we have this form, and then we have the background image, and then we have this section. So let's go ahead and do this. So inside this article, let's return an h1 that says IP address tracker, and then below this h1 we're going to have a form with no action, and then inside this form we're going to have an input with a type of text with a name of IP address, with an ID of IP address, with some placeholder text that says, let me check this, search for any IP address or domain. So search for any IP address or domain, and then probably I should set this to required, but it's not really necessary. And then below this, we are going to have a button with a type of submit, so that when we click on the submit button, why isn't this loading? So when we click on the submit button, then it's going to trigger the on submit event on the form which we are going to create. Now our submit button is going to be this arrow right here, which we're going to style out. So let's go ahead and grab this arrow. So this arrow is inside our images and it is called icon arrow. So let's import it. So right on top of this, let's go ahead and say import arrow from /images /icon -arrow .svg, and then we can now render our arrow inside here, inside an image. So inside the image here, we can render our arrow, and then because it's decorative, then we don't need to add in our alt attribute. And then we can save this, and then on the screen we should see something if this reloads, and you can see that now we have our title, and then we have our form here, and our button is somewhere, but because it is white in color, we can't really see it. So before we continue, let me go on top of this article and let me create a div, and this div is going to be our background image. So we're going to have an image tag here, and the source for this image is going to be background, and I'm going to import it as background. So I can just copy this down and then say import background, and this is going to be coming from pattern-bg, and it's a png image. And then when I save this, then it should appear on the screen, and that is our background pattern. So let me style this out to be better looking. So inside this image, I'm going to give this a class name of width-full, and probably you should know why I'm giving this a width-full. Look at this. If I remove this class from here, look at what happens to the image. It doesn't go all the way to the end, because using the design, I think the design is about 1440 pixels, but if you have a screen that is wider than 1440 pixels, then it leaves a space here. So when you add the class of width-full, basically telling it that take up 100% of whatever device width that is going to be shown in, so that when I save this, then now it's going to go to the end. And even if I zoom out to simulate bigger screens, or if I zoom in to simulate smaller screens, you can see that nothing changes all that much. And so the next thing that I want to do is I want to give this background a fixed height. So I'm going to give it a height of about 64. Let me see how this looks. That's a bit small. Let me say height 80 to make it bigger. Right there. So a height of 80 from the top. A height of 80 is about 320 pixels or 20 rem if you have 16 pixels as your default rem value. So we're going to have this as our image, and even on small screens you can see that it has a height of 80. And then because you don't want it to be like thinned out, you can see it's thinned out. I don't know where you can tell the difference. You can see now it is spaced out properly, but on smaller devices it is thinned out. You can add a class of object-cover so that like it's going to be zoomed in to properly fit the device width, and this is much better. And so the next thing that we're going to do is, because we want this part, we want the h1 and the form to be on top of this, then we're going to give this div a class name of absolute. So absolute, which means now you can see that now the content goes behind it, and in order for it to come on top of it, then you can either go here and give this as negative z index. So if I say negative z index of 10, then now the image is placed behind the content. Or if you don't want to do that, then you can cut this out and you can go inside this article and give this article a class name of relative, and this should now place it on top because relative positioning has a higher z index than absolute positioning. So that's why this doesn't change. So it's all matter of preference if you want to do it or if you do not want to do it. So I just prefer to add a negative z index here, so negative z index of 10, and then I can remove this class from here. And then now what we're going to do is inside this h1, let's tell this also, give this a class name of text-2xl, and then I can say text-center to move it to the center, and then text white and font bold. So font bold, and then inside this class name, give this a padding all round of 8 to push everything inwards and downwards just a bit, and this should be text white. There we go. And then inside this h1, give this a margin bottom of 8 to push away from the form, And then now we can go inside the input, we can style the input out. So give this a class name of padding y of 2, padding x of 4, with a rounded of large to give it a border radius around the edges, like so. And then you know what, I only want the rounded border to be on the left and not on the right. So I'm going to say rounded dash left dash large, so that now it has a rounded border on the left and no rounded border on the right. And then inside this button with the type of submit, I'm going to give this a class name of bg black. Actually not on the button, so cut this out, not on the image, place it here. And then let's go ahead and give this button a padding y of 2 and a padding x of 4, just like we did on the input. And then let's see what we need to do. Probably this should increase to 6 or to 4. We're going to test it out in a moment. And then let's give this a hover state. So when I hover over the button, I want the opacity to reduce to about 80, so that like it has like it shows you that you're hovering over it. Actually, let me reduce it to 60. Yeah, so that like it shows you that you're hovering over it. And then on the button, I want the rounded border on the right and not on the left. So I'm going to say rounded dash right dash large, which means it's going to have a rounded border on the right and not on the left. And then let me try something. Let's go inside the form, give this a class name of flex. Let me see. There we go. And then I can say justify dash center, which should bring it to the center. There we go. And then now what I want to do is I want this form to have a max width of around, let's say 4xl. And then now what I'm going to do is, and what you're going to notice is, I want to increase the width of this input, because I want this input, and you can see the reason why it is placed to the left is because of this max width here. So if I say mx auto, then it's going to place equal margins on the left and right, which means it's going to push this to the center. And then now what I want to do is I want to increase the width of this input. So inside the input right here, I'm going to give this a width of dash full, which means take up 100% of the parent container, which in this case is the form. And we have said that the form should have a max width of 4xl, and that's why it doesn't go all the way to the end. Now look at this. If I remove this from here, then the input is going to go all the way to the end. We don't want that to happen. So max width dash 4xl to limit it 4xl. And you know what, 4xl is a bit too big, so let me say about 2xl. How does that look? Let me check our design. So this is a bit small. It's a bit small. So let's say, let me say this. Let me say XL. Okay, XL looks fine. XL does look fine. And then let's increase the size of this H1 on large screens. So inside the H1 here, let's just say that for large screens, then make the text to be about 3XL. Make it just a bit bigger. There we go. And then now we need to have our white background. And our white background is this one right here, which displays the IP address and everything. And so let's go ahead and do that. Let me place this to be full screen just a bit. And then below this form, the form ends here. Let me see. This is the article. Okay, let me go below this article, I think. So below this article, let's have another article. Emmet is not working. Okay, so let me have another article here. What is happening? Visual Studio Code. Okay, so inside here we're going to have a div, and we're going to have 4 divs. So each of these divs is going to be as follows. The first one is going to be this one, and then the second one, and the third, and the fourth. So we're going to have the first one having an H2 or an H3 that says IP address with some paragraph text that says this, and then we're going to do the same thing for the rest of them. So let's have an H2. Okay, so we're going to have an H2, and then this H2 is going to be the following, and this one says IP address, so IP address. And then below this we're going to have a paragraph, and Emmet is not working for me for some reason. I don't know what's happening. Okay, so let's just have a paragraph, and then inside this paragraph we're going to have some default value, and the default value is going to be this one. We're just going to hard code it for now, and then once we get our data from the API, then we're going to populate it. So this says 192.212.174.1. So 192.212.174.101. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to style out this div, and then I'm going to copy and paste for the rest of them. So inside this article, we're going to give this article a class name of bg white with a rounded dash large with a very slight box shadow, and then with padding all around of 8 to push everything inwards. And then we can save this, and then we can check what we're going to have on the screen right here. You can see that this is going to be our white div. And then now what I want to do is I want to push it away from the edges. So right back, and you know what, I can do it right here. I can say give it this a margin on the x-axis of 8 to push it inwards. Let me see, there we go. Let me place this to the right and then place this to the left. And then what I want to do is on large screens, you can see that on large screens there is a border here on the right, but on smaller screens there is no border, right? So what we're going to do is this, we're going to give this a special class name, and we're going to say that for large screens, then we want a border on the right, and then for large screens we want the border on the right. So border on the right to be, wait, not border right, border color. So we want the border to be a slate color of about 400. And then when I save this and we check this on larger screens, then we should have this right here. You can see it's right here. Okay. And then what we're going to do is this. Now it's on large screens, by the way, but it's not on small screens. That's what we want to happen. So let's go ahead and style this IP address, the h2. Give this h2 a class of uppercase with text dash small, with font dash bold, and then with a text of slate dash 600. So 600 is a bit too dark. Let's say 400 or 500. How is this? And it's even spaced out a bit, so it has some letter spacing. So let's say tracking dash wide or wider. There we go. And then we're going to say give this a margin bottom of about 3 to push it away from the IP address. And then let's go inside this paragraph. Let's style this out like this. So give this a class name of font bold and text slate dash 900. And by the way, I'm just using the colors from Tailwind CSS, but if you want to use the actual colors, then you can go into your style guide and you're going to find the colors right inside here. So let's continue styling this out. Let's make this bigger. So font, not font, but text large. So let's say text large. And let me check how this looks on small screens. So it's not so big on small screens. So let's go ahead and let's see right here. That looks fine. And then we can do this. We can say that for large screens, or let's start with medium screens, let's increase the text to extra large or 2XL. And then for large screens, or let me say for extra large screens, let's increase the text to about 4XL. How big is that? That's a bit big. That's a bit big. So let's reduce this to XL and then reduce this to 3XL. This should be fine. This should be fine. So let's go ahead and just copy this div one more time. So copy this and paste it here, and then we can change this into, what does this say, location, and it says Brooklyn. So location, and then this text says Brooklyn. We can just check what we have on the screen, and we're going to have this. And then now what we want to do is we want to style this out, because obviously we don't want this to be as close to this as it is. So what we're going to do is inside the parent article, which is this one, we're going to display this as a grid, and then we're going to give this grid columns of 1 for small screens with a gap of 8 to push them away from one another. You can see that now they're pushed away from one another. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say that for medium screens, then we want the grid columns to be 2, so that now they're going to pair one and the other. And then for large screens, we want them to be 4 of them. So we're going to say that for large screens, then the grid columns should be 4. And then we're going to have 1, 2, and 3, and 4, which we're going to add. And we're going to have this. And of course, we need to limit this article, by the way. So let's give this article a max width of 4XL with an MX of auto to push it to the center. But it doesn't push it to the center because this has an MX of 8. So let me say that this should only apply for large screens. And we should have that. We should now push it to the center. And MX of, so max width 4XL is a bit too small. So let's say 6XL to push it even wider. There we go. And then now what we need to do is this. We're going to add in the rest of them. And I've just realized something. This text is a bit too big. It's a bit too big. So let me select, where is it? Where's the text here? Let me reduce this to 2XL and this one to 2XL as well. Make it just a bit smaller. That should be fine. That should be fine. And even this text is not even bold, it's semi-bold. It's semi-bold. So right here, let's just say semi-bold. And then here, let's say semi-bold as well. I mean, nothing even changes, so there's no need to even change it. Okay, so let's go ahead and add our last two articles, our last two divs actually. So just copy this div, copy this here, and this should say time zone. So time zone, and then this one says UTC -5, and then let's see, so 05, and then the last one says ISP. So copy this down one more time. This one says ISP, and then this one says SpaceX to begin with. And then now we can check, and we're going to have this, and then obviously we don't want this border to appear on the last div. So what we're going to do is we're just going to remove this one. Just remove this class. There we go. And we're going to have this, it's going to disappear, and we are going to have this. Now on small screens, the text should be centered. I've just remembered that. So what we're going to do is inside this article, we're just going to go to the end here and say text center, which should push it to the center. And then we're going to say that for large screens, then the text should go back to the left. And you know what, because we are displaying grid on medium screens, then I'm also going to say that for medium screens, then the text should go back to the left. And then now we can increase this, and you're going to see what we're going to have on the screen. So at medium screens, then this go to the left, and then on large screens, then we have this. So that's looking nice. You know what, let me not remove the margin on the X on large screens, because you can see that it goes to the end. So right where I had my MX Auto here, let me say this should be for extra large screens, so that now it's not going to go all the way to the end. You can see that. That's looking much better. And so now the next thing that we need to do is we need to generate our maps. So what we're going to do is back inside Visual Studio Code, I'm going to say Ctrl and J to open up our terminal. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to add another terminal here. So add another terminal, and then we want to install Leaflet.js and React Leaflet to help us to generate our maps. So I'm going to say npm install React Leaflet, and then we also need to install Leaflet. Okay, so always install this, because if you install this one alone, then it won't work. So install them, and then now we can take a look at the documentation right here. And so basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be generating a map container just like this. So we're going to be hard coding our data to begin with, but then once we get our data from the API for the latitude and the longitude, then we're going to be populating it dynamically, and then we're going to add in some bit of code so that this map is going to move to where the IP address is located. And so you can go through the getting started guides, but I'm not going to do that, because you also need to go through the actual guides for Leaflet. Let me just see if I can find it inside the installation. So it says before using React Leaflet, you must set up your project using Leaflet's quick start guide. So if you open this link, then it's going to take you back into Leaflet.js for the quick start guide. And you can see that here it says that you have to include the CSS for Leaflet, and then you include the JavaScript file. Now you can do this in React by just pasting this inside your return, but then because we're installing it using npm, then we're not going to be doing this, and this should have finished by now. And so now what we're going to do is the following. And so if you're going to be using the guides, then there are a number of ways that you're going to be importing these components. So we are not going to be using this one, and we are not going to be using this one, because obviously we have not used it. You have not used the CDN, but we have used React instead. You have used npm to install it. So we are going to be importing them from React Leaflet just like this. So just copy this part, and then at the top of your app.js, so on top of these two, just paste this in. And then now what we're going to do is back inside our documentation, we're just going to copy this part. So copy this part, copy the map container, and then outside of this article, so outside of this article, we're going to paste this in. So you can paste that in, and then now we need to define the position here. And you know what, you can pass it in as an array. You don't have to have like a position separate here, but I just want to pass it in as an array for now. So just copy these 2 points and then paste it inside here, and then paste it inside here as well. so that now when I save this, then you're going to see that our application is going to break. So let's just reload this so that it loads in the leaflet.js, and it says marker and pop-up is not defined. That is because we also need to import them here. So import marker and import pop-up, because those are the components that we have here. So we have the map container, we have the tile layer, we have the marker and the pop-up. So we can open this up and you can see that now our map shows, but it is messed up. And the reason why it is messed up is because the CSS is not applying. So what you're going to do is you're going to go back to the top, and then right below this you can say import leaflet / it's called leaflet / the dist file, the dist folder, and then we want to install leaflet.css. import it. This should be correct. And then now we can go ahead and let's reload this, and we should see that nothing happens on the screen. F12, let's see what happens. It says the logo. No, we deleted this file. Wondering why this is not applying. Probably this should be on top of it. Let's see. Reload, and still nothing happens. Interesting. Oh, and you know what? I've just realized why nothing happens. It's because we need to define a fixed height and a fixed width for our map container. So inside our map container here, let's pass in a prop called style, pass it in as an object, and set the height to be about 500 pixels. So let's say 500 pixels, and then set the width, because I want it to take up the entire width of the device. I'm going to set it to 100 viewport widths, and then we can save this. And then now let's try and reload this, and we should see our map, and there we go. Now by default it is 500 pixels. You can set this height to whatever you want. You can reduce it to 100, you can make it 1000, basically whatever you want it to be. And so now we can go through this. You can see that our marker is here. This is our marker, the one that is showing this current position. This is our marker. We're going to redefine our marker so that it actually shows this icon here, this like this location icon. And then you can zoom in and you can zoom out. And then the tile layer, so the tile layer that we have here is actually this part right here that gives the attribution for leaflet.js. And so what I'm going to change inside here is, because I want this map to be bigger than my screen, so I'm going to set it to about, let's say maybe 600 pixels. And I should mention that in the repository I set this height to 100 viewport heights. So you can set it as it is in the repository, or you can just play around with it. It doesn't really matter all that much. It just really depends on your preference. And then now what I want to do is I want this part, I want this article to move downwards just a bit. Let me see if I can do it inside the parent article here. Let me give it a margin top. So let me say that for large screens, margin top 10. Let me see what happens if it moves downwards. Okay, so it does move downwards, but it introduces a space here. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to say that for large screens, I want a negative margin on the bottom of 10. We should push this upwards. There we go. And then now I'm going to go inside this article, give this a class of relative, which should push it on top of the map, but it doesn't because the map has a higher Z index. So let me go inside here and let me give this a style, and let me start the Z index here to be 10,000, which is going to place it on top of the map. And there we go. And then probably increase the Z index here, not the Z index, but the margin on the bottom. Let's say margin bottom 20, so that it looks like it's almost in the middle. That's too much. Let's say 16, so that it's like almost in the middle, or rather in the middle if you can get it to be in the middle. And then let me increase also the height for the map. You can see that now the map is a bit smaller. So let's say about 700 pixels, and then let's reload this so that the map actually reloads. And we're going to have that. You can see this is looking quite nice, right? Okay, and so we are going to have this. So the next thing that we need to do obviously is we need to work on getting our data. But first of all, let me fix this icon before I forget. And so for this icon, we're going to do the following. We're going to go ahead and create a new file. So let me go ahead and create a new file inside the source folder, and I'm going to call this new file icon.js, so small I. And then inside here, we're going to say, we're going to import L from leaflet, and this is coming from leaflet. Let me just check if I can find it. So we have l.map here, so this is coming from leaflet. And then we also need to import our icon, and so the icon that we're going to be using is coming from images, and it is the location icon. So we're going to say import icon from dot slash images / icon dash location dot svg, and then we're going to say export default icon, which is the name of our component. So let me call it icon. I know it's not even that, it should be l.icon. And then inside here we're going to pass in an object. Oops, should be one bracket. So pass in an object, and then we're going to have a few parameters inside here. So we're going to have the icon size, and then we're also going to have the icon anchor, and then we have the pop-up anchor, so pop-up anchor, and then we have the icon URL, and obviously the icon URL is now coming from our icon that we've just imported, and all of these are arrays. So just like that, and then remember having your commas. And so the numbers that we're going to be passing inside here, I was actually playing around with them so that we can actually get them looking close to this. So the first one is going to be 32,40, and then the second says 10,41, and then this one says 2, -40, and we're going to have that. And then inside our app.js, we're going to say this, bring this back to the top. Let's go ahead and import our icon. So below this, let's say import what's it called, import icon from, should be dot, what is it, from /icon, should be this one. Let me see if it's going to work. And then now what we're going to do is inside our marker, so our marker right inside here, we can also define the icon that we wanted to use, and we can pass this to be equal to the icon that we have just created, so that when I save this and reload this, reload our app here, you can see that now the icon that it shows is this one. Now I want that when I scroll on this map, I want the map to zoom in and out. So right where we have scroll will zoom here, I'm going to set this to true, so that now when I zoom in on this map, reload it. So when I zoom in on this map or zoom out, then it zooms in and zoom out. I mean, when I scroll on the map, that's what I mean. So when I scroll on the map, it zooms in and zooms out accordingly. And so next, let's go ahead and work on our API, and let's go ahead and work on our GET request. So on top of this, because we're going to be getting data from the API, then we need to import our two hooks. So import useState and useEffect from React, and then let's set up our state values. So the first state value that we're going to have is the address, and the set address function, and this is going to be equal to useState. By default, it's going to be null because we're going to populate it when we fetch data from this API. And then we're going to have a second state value called IP address, and set IP address, and this is going to be equal to, let me make this capital, this is going to be equal to an empty string, because this is the state value that is going to be controlling how the input inside here is changing. And so let's go ahead and now fetch our data. So let's create our useEffect, and then inside here we're going to go ahead and create a function called get initial data, and I'm trying to call the functions here as I did in the repository. So this is going to be equal to an asynchronous function, and then we're going to say this, so const res is equal to await fetch, and then we're going to be fetching data dynamically, so passing our backticks. And then you know what, to make this even better, what you can do is you can cut this out, and then you can place in a try catch block, so you can try for some piece of code, and then if it fails, then you want to catch an error. So basically that's the try catch block, and then the error, you can pass in the error inside here, and then now we can write in our get request inside here, and then let's also call our function called get initial data. And then now our get request is going to be similar to this, so just cut this out, and then we can paste it inside here. What we want to do, however, is we want to change this to use our env file. So remember, we created our .env file inside here. We want to pass in our API key dynamically. So I'm going to cut this out, and then I'm going to place my $ and my curly brackets, which means now we can pass in variables. So inside here, we want to access the .env file, and using Node.js, you can say process.env and then pass in your variable. So React_app_API_ key, which is basically the same name that I have inside here. And so what this means is that it's going to be using our API key from our .env file, and it's not going to expose it to our repository. And then now I forgot to mention that if you leave your IP address empty, so if you leave this to be an empty string like so, then it's going to default into your public IP address. So the reason why I don't want it to default to my public IP address is obvious. So I'm going to pass in this string, and you know what, instead of this, let me just pass in the one that we have inside here. So copy this, and then we're going to paste in this link, and this is not actually for SpaceX, as you're going to see in a moment. And then inside our error, we're just going to say console dot trace, and then just trace the error. And then let's go ahead. Below this, we're going to say this says what, so const res equal to await, and then the data that we get back, so const data is going to be await res.json, so convert the data into JSON format. And then we're going to say set address into the data that we get back, so basically populating this part right here, populating our state value. So let me go ahead, and then now we can save this. And then now what we need to do is we need to pass in our data dynamically now. So inside here, instead of this being hard coded, we're going to pass in address.ip. So address coming from here, which is our state value, which I've just populated when we run this. And then I forgot that this is a use effect. So because I don't want this to run infinitely, then I'm going to pass in an empty dependency array, which is only going to make it to run once on the initial render of the application. So we can save this, and then now we should see our address.ip, and it should be showing 192 dot something inside here, but it shows nothing. Let's open up our console. Let's see what it says. It says failed to load the resource. And so when you reload it, it says cannot read properties null of IP. Now, the reason why this usually happens in React applications is because we are rendering address.ip, which is a variable, before our get request can run. So what we need to do is we need to add in a check. And so what we're going to do is the following. We're going to cut out, let me see. So this article, so beginning from this article all the way to the map container to the bottom, cut it out. And then we're going to place in a check where we're going to say when address is true, that only when address is true, meaning it is not null, that's when we want the rest of this to render. And then you can pass it in, and then we are going to have this. So let me see if everything is correct. Let's save this. I was expecting an error, but there is no error, and something is wrong with my VS Code. So it says module build failed white. Let's reload. So module build failed yeah, that was the error I was expecting. So it is mentioning the error here, but it is not showing me an error here. I don't know why, because my VS Code has an issue. And so what we need to do in order to fix that error is we need to grab the entire article all the way to the bottom, and then we need to only return one item. In this case, I'm going to choose to return a React fragment. So just place in your fragment, and then inside here you can place in your block of code, and then when you save it, then the error should disappear, and we are going to have that. Look at that. So now the map doesn't load in until everything else has loaded. So this still says forbidden, so forbidden. Let me see. So it's still saying forbidden. So let me try something here. Let me try and say console.log the data that we get back. Let me see what logs to the console, if anything at all. Loading. Okay, so this is the error that we're getting. It says check credit balance or enter the correct API key. So most likely my credits have finished. So let me see if I can fix that. Okay, so I've fixed the error that I was having for the 403 forbidden because my credits had expired. But for you, it's most likely going to work on the first try because it gives you 1,000 credits for free. And so when you console log to the when you console log the data that you get back, then this is what you're going to have on the screen. And you can see that we have the IP address showing here, which we have just passed in. and then the ISP is going to be this one. You can see it's not the same as this one, but we're going to pass in all this data. So let's go ahead and let's do it. Let's continue structuring our return. And so what we're going to do is, where we have our location here, we're going to pass in the address dot location dot region, and the address dot location dot region is what we have in our API. So we have the address dot location dot region, and then we need to pass in the city, or is it the city and then the region? Mountain View, California. Yeah, I think it's the city and then the region. So city, comma, and then address dot location dot region. And then where we have the time zone, we're going to pass in this. We're going to say, let me check. So it says address dot location dot time zone. So address dot location dot time zone, and the time zone is in UTC format. So that's why I have this text that says UTC, because by default from the API it doesn't show you what time zone it is in. And then let's go ahead and let's display our ISP, and the ISP is going to be this one. So address dot ISP. So just pass in address dot ISP, and then now when we save this and we go back into our application, then this should reload. And there we go. So that is working correctly. And then what you can do to see whether it is actually correct is you can go ahead and pass in another IP address that you know of. So inside here you can also go ahead and pass in 8.8.8.8, which is still Google LLC, and it should reload this. And you can see that now we have our IP address showing, we have the UTC showing, we have the location, and then we have the ISP. But of course you have noticed that even though this is showing the correct IP address, the map has not moved. So we also need to work on the map. And so let me change this back into the original one, and then now let's go into our map container. And the reason why this did not move is because the center is set to this fixed value, as well as the marker position. So you can say Control D, so Control and D, and then you can cut this out and say, let's pass in our address dot location dot latitude, and the latitude is coming from here. So the address location dot latitude, and the latitude is the first value that you pass in into the position where you want your marker to be, where you want your map to be, and then the second value is the longitude. So we can get both of them from the API, so the latitude and the longitude. And then we can place in our comma and say address dot location dot lng, which is the longitude dot lng, and we're going to have this. And then once again I've selected both text by just highlighting the text and saying Control D, which selects the next text that matches the one that you have highlighted. And then now look at this. When I save this, then we go back into our application. Now the marker is no longer here. Now the marker is going to be in California. So if I zoom out of the map, and then we can let this load in. Okay, there we go. Load. You can see that now the marker is in California. You can see that, right? Now what we need to do is, we don't want to zoom in and out ourselves. We want this to happen automatically. Now the obvious way to do that using React is to just run a use effect that checks for when the latitude and the longitude change. And so I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to show you the problem that we're going to have with it, and then I'm also going to show you the solution. So on top of our use effect, so right below our use effect, our first use effect, we can have a second use effect. And then inside this second use effect, we can say map.flyTo, and flyTo is a method that comes from leaflet.js, and then we want it to fly to a certain position. So fly to a certain position with a zoom level of 13 by default, and then we want it to animate true so that it doesn't just pop in. And then inside here we can pass in our map, and then we'll pass in our position, which is going to be our default value. Now of course you're wondering, what is map, what is position? So map is going to be coming from use map, which is a hook that we get access to from React Leaflet. So we can create a variable called map. So const map is equal to, and just initialize it to use map, which creates this map, and we can get access to the fly to method, and we're saying fly to the position, and the position here is going to be our latitude and longitude. And so you realize that the problem with this is that we need our get request to run fast so that we can get access to the latitude and longitude. such that even if you go on top of this and specify a position, you can specify it according to the address that you get back. However, by the time JavaScript is evaluating this, it does not know where your latitude and longitude is going to come from. So what we're going to do is, if I try and go below this, because if we're going to be assuming that this has run, then we specify our position below this. If I say const position is going to be equal to the address dot location dot latitude, and then the address dot location dot longitude, and then now it can access this here, you would think that this is going to work. But if I save this, now look at the screen, and actually, you know what, now we need to pass in our position here. We need to pass it inside here. So just select Control D and then pass in your position here. So position without the square brackets. Now if I save this, look at this, our application breaks. Right now, if you click on F12 to open up your terminal, it says that use leaf context cannot be used in a descendant of map container. So the solution for this is therefore to do the following. We need to extract this marker into a separate component. So I'm going to cut this out, and then I'm going to create a component called marker position. So position. So let's go ahead and create this component. So I'm going to create a new file inside the source folder called marker position.js, and then inside here I'm just going to say import React from React, and then I'm going to say export default function marker position, and then we're going to return, and we're going to be returning our marker. And you know what, let me return it inside a fragment like so. And then let's go ahead and import these components. So we need to import marker, and then we also need to import the pop-up. So pop-up from React Leaflet. And then now the problem with this is that it doesn't still know where the position is coming from. We are going to fix that in a moment, but let's import our icon. So import icon from should be /icon like so. And then now when I save this, I can go back into my app.js, and you know what, I can even pass a fixed position here first of all. So let me just pass in, what was it in the documentation? So let me just pass this in so that you can see that this component is actually going to be working. And so if I pass this in and save it, and then let's go to the top, let's remove this import because we no longer need it, and then we can also remove this. But now we need to import our marker position component. Let's say import marker position from marker position, and then when I save this, then look at this, our application should not break, but it says use leaf context. So sorry about that, we need to remove this also, and then we also need to remove this import, and we need to remove this. So just comment this out, actually comment it out, and then we can save this, and then now our application should not break, but it says position is not defined on line 111. So let's go to line 111. And so here, this one, so we have removed it, so we need to pass in our latitude and longitude. So right here you can just say, pass in your square brackets and say address dot location dot latitude and address dot location dot longitude. And then when I save this, then our application should work. Right, it now works. You can see that now we have our IP address. We have, where is the marker? Where is the marker? And our marker is here. Now look at this, our marker is here because we have passed in a fixed position for the marker. That's why our map is centered in California, but our marker position is in London. Now let's go ahead and fix this, and we need access to the latitude. Where is it? We need access to this basically. So what we're going to do is, using props, I'm going to pass in a prop called address, and I'm going to make it equal to the address state value, which we have on top as our state value. And then when I save this, I can go into marker position, and then I can destructure address as a prop here. And then now I can set the position here to be equal to address dot location dot latitude and address dot location dot longitude, so that now when I save this, then our marker is now going to go into California. right here. You can see that now this is correct. Now if I try to change the IP address here to another IP address, let's try it out. So right here, let's change it to 8888. Now our marker position should also go into the correct place, and our map is now going to be centered in the correct place. So if you want to check whether your map is centering correctly, just reload this and you should see that your marker is going to be on the same place as your map. So the logic is working correctly. So let me make this back to the original IP address. And now what we need to do is we want our map to automatically reposition when the IP address changes. So I'm going to go back into marker position, and you know what, basically what we did inside here. So just comment this out and comment it, and then just cut this out, and then we can go ahead inside here, we can paste it below this. So paste it in, and then now instead of passing this in manually, you can pass it in as position. So position, which is basically this. And then now we need to import use map, because use map is what is going to get us access to the map method here. So import use map, and then we need to initialize use map. So const map is equal to use map. And then now we can save this, and then let's see. So it says use effect is not defined, of course, because I need to import use effect. There we go. And then now let's also save our app.js. And then now look at that. Look at that. Just by reloading it, now our map goes to the correct position. And now I've just remembered that I can use this form. However, we have not yet made the functionality for this form. So let's go ahead and now let's add in the functionality for the form. Now the form is inside our app.js, and it is right here. And so we want to turn this form into a controlled form and this input into a controlled input. And we can do that by setting the default value of the input equal to our state value that is called IP address. And the default value of IP address, remember, is an empty string. And then what we need to do is, because if you save this, so let me just save it and show you. If you save it and then you try to type in something inside here, look at this, nothing is being typed in. That is because it has a default value. So if you want to be able to type in something, then you also need to have an onChange attribute on this. So onChange, and when it changes, you want to call a function called, let me call this function get entered address. So get entered address, and then we are going to create this function. So let's go ahead, let me just copy this, and then above this I'm going to create a function called get entered address. And then inside here, and so inside our function here, we're going to be running a get request that is similar to this. So let me just copy this, and you know what, I can even remove this console log, and then I can paste it here, remove the console log. And then now what we want to do is we want to dynamically check for the IP address that is entered. And so what we're going to do is, because the IP address can only be in the format of 4 numbers separated by full stops, then we need to add a regex expression that is going to check for whether the IP address is actually valid before all of this can run. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to go into my repository and I'm going to copy the regex that I had. And so once again, you can check the link in the description for this IP address for this repository. And then inside the source folder, you're going to find a file called app.js. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to copy these lines here. So from the IP address and the domain, so just copy these lines, and then we can go ahead and paste them below this. So this first part here is the one that checks for whether the entered IP address is correct. And then this second one is the one that checks for whether the entered domain is also correct. And you're going to see whether this is going to come into play. And so let's go ahead and now we are going to change this up. And so what we're going to do is the following. I'm going to cut this out up to here, cut it out, and then place in my $ and my curly brackets. And then I'm going to say this. I'm going to say check IP address. So I'm calling my regex that we have here. And I'm going to say .test. And .test is a method that exists on regex expression to check whether the entered value equals the regex. And we're going to say that we're going to be testing the IP address. And we're going to say that if this is true, then we want to append this. So backticks append IP address and set it equal to our $, the IP address that is entered. I hope we are still together. And then if this evaluates to false, what we're going to do is the following. We're going to say check domain, meaning it is not an IP address. If this evaluates to false, it means that whatever is typed into the input is not an IP address. So we want to check whether it is a domain instead. So we're going to say check domain.test, and we're going to be testing IP address once again, which is still our state value. And then if this evaluates to true, then we want to append not IP address, we want to append the domain and set it equal to our IP address, because it means that now whatever has been entered in is a domain and it is not an IP address. And then if this evaluates to false, then I just want it to go back into an empty string, and what this does is that it's going to evaluate into your own public IP address. So once I save this, then it's going to format. So let me save it, and it should format. It doesn't format. Okay, it doesn't format. I hope this is this is correct. If it's not correct, then I'm just going to do a bit of copying and pasting. And so what we need to do now is we need to call a function on our form, which is going to listen for the submit event. So I'm going to say on submit, I'm going to call a function called handle submit, and then we can go ahead and create this function. So below this, we're going to say function handle submit. We can access the synthetic event of E, and then we're going to say e.prevent default, meaning prevent the default behavior of the form reloading the page. And not, this is not an arrow function, sorry about that. And then what we need to do now is we need to call in this function, because this function should only run when the form is submitted. So just copy this and then paste it inside here and remember to call it. And then we can save this. And then let me check something. I made a mistake. I made a mistake here. I made a mistake here. I've just realized it. What you need to do here is we need to set it equal to the synthetic event of E, and then you can say set IP address into e.target.value, which basically means that populate the state value called IP address with whatever is typed inside the input. And then that is going to cause it to be populated here. And then now when we submit the form, then the regex is going to run to check whether it's an IP address. And if it is an IP address and it evaluates to true, then we're going to append IP address and our get request is going to run. And if it is not an IP address, meaning it is a domain, then we're going to append the domain to the get request, and the get request is going to run. And then if both evaluate to false, then we just want to append an empty string, which is going to cause our get request to run with our public API, with our public IP address, sorry. So let's go ahead and save this, and then let's see what we have in our application, this one. So constraints is equal to await. That's because I need to have a sync somewhere. So we say a sync function and save it. Oh, now it formats. Oh, it's because I didn't have this that it was not formatting correctly. There we go. So now that it formats like this, you can see that it's a bit more readable. I hope it's a bit more understandable as well. And I've just remembered something. Before I try this out, let me add autocomplete off on the form. So let's say autocomplete, set this to off and save it. Just reload it to make sure. And then now we can try to search for an IP address here. Let's say 8888. And when I click on submit, enter, then it goes into the actual IP address. And if I try to search for a domain, let's search for google.com. It should take me into the Google domain, the IP address, and you can see that that is working correctly. So it checked. So our regex checked and it realized that it was not an IP address. So this checked instead and it passed to be a domain. And then now this run. And now one thing that I've just realized is that I want that when I submit this, then this should go back into an empty string. So we can just go ahead here and say set IP address back into an empty string, and we can save it. And then now if I try to search for 8888 again, then there we go, it goes back into an empty string, and that is looking quite nice. And I think that is actually the end of the project. And so what I'm going to do is, if you want to submit this, back into Frontend Meta, what you're going to do is you can run the build for this, close this, wait a minute, it says the position array makes the dependencies of use effect. So it says wrap the initialization in use memo. Let's fix this. Markup position, source markup position here. So it says that the position on line 69. So this one is saying it makes the dependencies of use effect, so the dependencies to change on every render. So okay, so what it means is this: we basically need to import another hook here from called use memo, and then what we're going to do is, instead of just initializing the position to this, we're going to initialize it to use memo, and then we're going to pass in our callback function, and then we're going to say return, and then we want to return the position that we want, and then as a dependency we can pass in the very same thing. Oops, don't add into square brackets. And this is basically how you're going to fix that error. So save this, and then that error should go away. And then this one says replace color. Just this is a tailwind error. This is not a React error. This is a tailwind error. So don't worry about it. Not even an error, it's a warning. Okay. And then you can see that now the warning for use memo is no longer there. So that's how you fix it, and you can test it out. You can see that like it's still going to work as you expect it to work. So if I reload this and then search for an IP address 8888, then you can see that our application is still working correctly, and you can click on F12 to make sure that you don't have any errors in the console. And this is an error from the manifest.json file, so don't worry about it. And you know what, you can even go ahead and delete the manifest.json file. You don't really need it. So inside the public folder you can delete the manifest.json, and then just remember to remove the link for the manifest.json file here as well, so that it doesn't keep bothering you. And you know what, even these comments are not really necessary, these ones. And so I was saying this, if you want to submit this to frontend method, then what you're going to do is you're going to just run the build step for React. So you can say npm run build. Okay, now running this build is going to create a build folder for you. And so once it runs, you're going to see that we are going to have a build folder. However, when you're committing this to GitHub, I do recommend that you commit your React application. So just go into GitHub and create a new repository for yourself, and then commit your source code to GitHub. But then when submitting on Frontend Mentor, then submit the actual link. And so once this build step finishes running, let me just go ahead and show you what you're going to do. And remember that I'm going to delete this repository. So I want to create a new repository and show you how you're going to submit it to Frontend Mentor. So I'm going to create a new repository here, and I'm going to call this repository IP test. So this is just a test to show you how it's going to work. So create repository, creating, and then you can copy this link, and then inside your command prompt, just add in another command prompt here using this plus. You can just say git add all and git commit. Just say commit, can't spell, and then just say initial commit. And by the way, if you're wondering, I'm just following these steps here. So I've just added everything. Instead of just adding one file, I've just said git add dot, which adds everything, and then git commit, and then git branch. You can make this to be the main branch, but by default GitHub always has your main branch as the default one. And then we're going to do this one next. So let's just say git commit initial commit, and then I'm going to say git remote add origin. You can see that this is this step right here, and then paste in the link to our remote repository, and then just say git push -u origin main, which is this final step, which is going to push it to this remote repository. So let this finish pushing. And so once it's done pushing to GitHub, if you reload this page, then you're going to have your repository here. And then I'm going to log into Netlify to show you how you're going to submit it. So let me just shut down this server. Okay, so our build process is done, and you can see that now we have our build folder inside here. Now you can try to check whether this is running correctly by running this command, but I'm not going to do that because we're going to deploy to Netlify anyways. So let's just log into Netlify, login, and then let me close this, and then close this, and let me close this one, and this one, and this one. And then inside Netlify, let's just say import an existing project from GitHub. And the project is called IP test. So IP test. And you know what? I'm even doing something wrong. I'm doing something wrong. Sorry about that. So back into Netlify, instead of an existing project, you can just say deploy manually, which is going to give you this drag and drop. So if I go into where I have my project, it should be inside, what did I call it? This one? I'm not even sure. Let me see. No, it can't be this one. It can't be this one. It should be this one. So I have the build folder inside here. Now, if I just drag and drop it inside here, then it's going to upload it and then it's going to deploy it to Netlify. So if I change the site, I don't even need to change the site name really. But once this finishes deploying, then we should see something. Just give it a moment. Okay, so it's taking quite a long time to upload and I'm not sure why. But the logic behind this is that once it uploads, then you're going to have a link to your application, which is going to be working correctly. And by the way, I should mention that if you're using Brave browser, then please remember to disable tracking on your application. Otherwise, it's going to give you an error in the console. However, it does work on Chrome. So what you're going to do now is you're just going to copy the link to your application and submit it on Frontend Mentor, and then copy the link to your GitHub repository as well and submit it, and that's how you're going to submit the solution. So I've been sitting here for quite a while waiting for this to upload, but it has not yet uploaded. And so you can just follow the steps that I've just explained a few seconds ago, and you can submit your solution to Frontend Mentor. And so that is going to be the end of the video. And if you enjoyed it, then please leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. And I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.